Miss Langdale pointed out that by this stage, Mrs. Rees had seen the thematic review of the babies' deaths and she'd seen Mrs. Powell's chart, with Lucy Letby's name highlighted as being present for every one. Now, Dr. Breary was calling her at home, asking for a second time that day to remove Lucy Letby from the ward.
Wasn't that enough at this point for you to say, actually, the babies come first, we don't know why particularly, but we must keep them safe? It's not about employer and employee rights, it's about the babies at this point.
I fully appreciate that. But then why, my question, why did Steve Breary not give me something else?
They've given you that they thought she may be deliberately harming babies. What more did you want? Did you need the mode of attack? What did you want? How could they give you that without the pathology, forensics that were required?
I don't know. Because I thought, because they're not willing to give me anything else to support my decision whether to exclude or remove, I honestly thought it was personal. And perhaps I was slighted by that.
And the fact they couldn't give you something else didn't mean there wasn't something else to find,
No,
did it?
I appreciate that.
Unexpected, unexplained. They couldn't give you medical causes. That was their contribution. They didn't know why these babies had died. Couldn't be clear about that. So it needed proper investigation.
I fully appreciate that. But then why tell me he's got a drawer of doom and won't share the contents of it with me?
She denied having a natural antipathy towards the consultants and said she couldn't remove Lucy Letby from the ward simply because he was demanding it. She also said she'd felt bullied and intimidated by him during the phone call.
He was trying to push me to remove Lucy Letby off the neonatal unit when nobody had been prepared to do that before. So there was a difference in his voice and his tone. He doesn't raise his voice, Steve Breary never does. But because he'd phoned me up for home, and was pushing me to do it again, that's why I phoned Alison Kelly immediately after and said, this consultant is still on the phone to me, agitating.
Now, Richard Baker, KC, who represents the families of some of the babies, asked Mrs. Rees if Dr. Breary's demands got her back up.
I wouldn't say put my back up, but why wasn't he working with me? Like I've said previously, just because a consultant makes a demand, as a senior nurse, you don't, when they click the fingers, you don't jump how high. I mean, I accept, and looking back at all of these things, yes, and that's why we're here today, so we can learn lessons, and I'm sorry for all of that.
Do you think, though, that where an otherwise senior, sensible consultant is saying to you that they have serious concerns that if Lucy Letby comes into work tomorrow that she will murder a baby, which I presume is a fairly novel conversation to be having with a consultant, does that not immediately start alarm bells ringing from a patient safety point of view that maybe we should just take some safeguarding action?
Yes, and I've acknowledged that. I wish I had now brought the safeguarding team in, but equally, and I'll keep saying it, why did Ravi Jairam or Steve Breary not call the safeguarding team in if they were so insistent that she was doing? Why did they continue to work alongside her? I'm not making excuses. I acknowledge I should have done it too.
I'm sure they'll be asked that question, but again, Ravi Jairam talking to Karen Townsend in a coffee shop, I mean, that irritated you, didn't it? That's what you...
No, it didn't irritate me. If I'd have been working with any healthcare professional that I thought was purposely harming a patient, I wouldn't have declared it in a hospital cafe over a cup of coffee. And that was the point I was making.
What he did do, though, and what Ravi Jairam did as well, is to ask you not to let her come in for another shift so that this could be investigated. They were unhappy about the risk that she created for patients. And your reaction to that was to effectively say, she is coming in to the unit.
I don't recall saying that.
You refused to take her off the off for shift the following day. As a consequence, she attacked baby Q, didn't she?
Yes.
We should point out here that the jury couldn't reach a verdict on the allegation that she tried to kill baby Q, so Lucy Letby wasn't actually convicted of that offence. But Peter Skelton KC, who represents more of the families, asked Mrs. Rees to justify her decision.
You'd known by this stage for at least 6 months or so that there were concerns about Lucy Letby possibly harming children.
Okay. Yes.
For a long period of time, this wasn't news to you.
No, it wasn't.
2 babies had just died out of a family of 3 that had just been born.
I know.
And you were being called by a consultant saying, in order to protect children on the unit, you need to get rid of this nurse off the shift. It's an extraordinary situation to be in.
It is.
But your response was to be cross and not to take that step. Can you actually justify that?
I escalated again, the second time that day, to my director of nursing. I was following hospital policy and procedure. I was unsure what to do because he wasn't giving me anything else. So I picked up the phone immediately and told my director of nursing that he'd been back on the phone to me.
Did you have the power to remove Letby from that shift?
Yes, I did.
Without
Not in isolation. I would have had to discuss it with my director of nursing and then involve human resources. You can't just do it in isolation.
And what was your recommendation to Alison Kelly?
I
Presumably she was reliant on you.
I didn't make any recommendations to Alison Kelly. I was just informing her of the events that afternoon and the events of Steve Breary calling me.
Isn't the reality that you didn't want to remove Lucy Letby?
If I'd have had good reason, I would have done.
So we know baby P had died that afternoon, which was a Friday, and his brother had passed away the day before. Anne-Marie Lawrence told the inquiry that as the risk midwife, she should have known immediately about their deaths, but no one from the unit reported them as a clinical incident. Instead, she said she only found out when she went onto the labour ward on the Monday morning, 3 days later, and overheard the midwives talking about what had happened.
The practice development midwife, Lorraine Millward, when I came onto the central labour suite, seen me and said, "Oh my goodness, Anne-Marie, have you heard that one of the triplets have died?" And I was shocked. I said, "I haven't heard anything, nothing's been reported." And she said, "None of us can believe it, but one of the triplets have died." So I said, "I'm going to go there now." The delivery suite was connected to the neonatal unit. And so I made my way straight there. And there was a lot of people on the neonatal unit, several more bodies than I would ever normally see. And they prevented me from entering further into the neonates. I said, "I'm the risk lead, I've come here, I've heard one of the triplets have died and it's not been reported." And one of the staff nurses, one of them got tearful and upset, and another staff nurse said, "2 of the triplets have died, not 1.
She said she was told a meeting was taking place in the office, so she asked a nurse to see if she could join.
I asked them to go knock on the door and tell them who I was and what my role was, and they would let me in. And she did that and came back and said they are not to be disturbed.
Now, we know that Lucy Letby did work on the unit the day after baby P's death when she allegedly attacked baby Q, and then she went on holiday. And she was never then allowed back. Initially, she was put in the complaints department. Then, as we've said, she was moved along the corridor to the Risk and Patient Safety Office, where Ms. Lawrence was based. She said she didn't think it was appropriate for Lucy Letby to have been placed in that job. And Mr. Delaporte asked her about this, and then she revealed something that, with hindsight, is pretty illuminating.
So far as you were aware, did Letby have access to patient notes or reports such as the thematic review? Had she wished to look at them?
I think if she wanted to look at them, she absolutely could have, because she had access to the Risk and Patient Safety Team S-Drive. Now, I don't know whether her access was limited in terms of what folders she could or couldn't access. But you will notice from my statement, I talk about her having information that I didn't have at that point. And so I think it's fair to say that if you were to ask me, would she be able to access these things, I would say that would be a possibility, yes.
And did you think it was appropriate for her to have access to things that you didn't have access to?
Absolutely not.
She told the inquiry about one occasion in around autumn 2016, when she came into work to find Lucy Letby very distressed. It transpired that she was aware that a baby had collapsed on the neonatal unit, but staff in the Risk and Safety Office weren't aware because it hadn't been reported on the system. So Miss Lawrence said she became concerned that Lucy Letby had access to information she shouldn't have, or that someone on the unit was telling her what was going on.
She also said she regularly overheard conversations in the corridors between Lucy Letby, Mrs. Rees, and some of the other nursing managers who would talk about how she was being made a scapegoat for poor medical care and a lack of team working. She said that working alongside Lucy Letby made her feel conflicted, and Mr. Delaporte asked her to explain why.
I just want to give you a brief opportunity to just comment upon how you were feeling about this whole situation, bearing in mind what had happened in May.
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question, if I'm honest. It's something I've reflected on for many, many years. It was a very, very difficult time. I was working alongside somebody who initially I had thought had done some terrible, terrible crimes, and then I can't say I was made to feel, because nobody can make me feel anything, but I felt ashamed for raising them. And then I spent some time thinking if I'd have just raised them a little bit louder, potentially I could have prevented the deaths of 2 of those babies, and I didn't. And then I had to work with her alongside her and listen to conversations that perhaps she might have been innocent, and it was really difficult. And having heard some of the things I've heard today and seen some of the evidence, a lot of that was avoidable. Certainly a lot of the deaths were avoidable, and a lot of the difficulties we faced as clinicians working in that department was avoidable.
Now, Karen Rees was also asked about her relationship with Lucy Letby once she'd been removed from the unit. She said senior managers told her to have weekly meetings with her, and she admitted she got to know her and possibly became too close. She sent her messages saying, "Hang on in there, girl. Your nursing team are fully behind you. We will get through this, lol." She also sent Lucy Letby an email saying she promised to continue to fight for her. But she said there came a point when she felt the hospital wasn't being transparent about the allegations. So when the plan to get her back onto the unit was put off, she sent an email to the Director of Nursing, Alison Kelly, telling her they were making a mistake. That email was read to the inquiry by Miss Langdale.
In my opinion, this decision is wrong and immoral, based on a senior clinician having a gut feeling with no evidence, except that Ella has been present at a number of these neonatal deaths. There is also the impact not only for the NNU but for the rest of the organisation, and the message that this sends out. A clinician is being listened to and supported with potential devastating consequences for a nurse. How are the nurses on the NNU going to react?
In the email, Mrs. Rees also questioned why, if the allegations were serious enough to remove her from the unit, the police hadn't been called in to investigate. She also told the inquiry that later on she pleaded with Mrs. Kelly to call in the police. She said relationships were breaking down and there appeared to be no answers. She also eventually attended a meeting in February 2017 between senior managers, including the Chief Executive Tony Chambers, the Medical Director Ian Harvey, the Nursing Director Mrs. Kelly, and Lucy Letby and her parents John and Sue Letby. According to the notes of that meeting, Mr. Chambers acknowledged it had been a tough time for Lucy Letby, and he said the entire consultant body would be writing her a letter of apology for what he called their inappropriate behaviour. There was then a long conversation about whether that apology should be written by each individual consultant. So Ms. Langdale asked Mrs. Rees about this.
Whose needs were paramount in that meeting?
Clearly, Lucy Letby's and her parents.
There's no reference to the safety of babies at all in that meeting, is there?
No.